Right, folks, welcome to the Flyte Contributors Inc. Happy to see you here. And yeah, sorry, I know a couple of you joined the last meeting that probably should have been canceled because a lot of people was on vacation, me including. So sorry for not communicating it on time. But yeah, we're resuming. Okay, so again, if you're just joining, here's the agenda doc. Feel free to add anything you want to discuss to the open mic section. And also add your name to the attendees list. I will do it right away. Cool. So Bogra, and sorry if this is not the right pronunciation for your name. Sorry about that, but welcome, and will you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Thank you. I'm Pura. Nice to meet you, all of you. Happy to be here.
Great. And yeah, thank you so far for your contributions, your help answering questions, helping different fronts. Thanks so much. All right. Okay, let's go straight to new RFCs. There are, I think there are three of them. I'll share the screen right away. Here we go. So new RFCs are usually here in this board. And first one, I know that Fabian Pura have been working a lot on this, but not sure if you wanted to give us the TLDR in this proposal.
Do you want Pura or shall I?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So it's about the problem that exists with, in principle, all distributed plugins, specifically PyTorch, PyTorch Elastic, probably TensorFlow and MPI. The reason is that for error propagation from the worker pods, the entry point of the pod writes a file into blob storage called error.pb. And when multiple worker pods try to write the same file, then there's a race condition which pod gets to write the file. And we might not detect the root cause error because typically the root cause, like the worker pod that dies first is the one that has the root cause errors. The worker pods that die later, they overwrite the error PB, and these errors are just symptoms of the root cause error because one worker disappeared from the distributed training like worker group. And we propose to make it possible that a node in the graph writes more than one error file if multiple pods exist for this node, so that we can then figure out which exception was the first one that happened, which probably is the root cause, and then use that one to determine whether the task is recoverable and also display this information in the UI. Because what currently happens is that when a distributed job fails, you need to go through the logs of all the worker pods and figure out which one died first and what the reason was, because all the others die with, hey, we're missing one worker, we need to crash. So we need to figure out the first one, and we want that to be visible immediately in the UI. I think we already have a pretty good idea of how it could be done. There are some open questions regarding how exactly a plugin should communicate to the plugin manager that it needs another output reader for the error files. I think there are two options how that could be configured. So we're looking for someone who knows that part of the code base well and knows where best to inject this logic. And I don't have a full picture yet where Flyte Propeller needs to log the information which pod died first so that the UI can display it. There are still also have some open questions. But apart from that, that's it. So the goal is to make error handling for distributed tasks deterministic by removing this race condition and by figuring out what the first error was so that users don't have to search it manually. Are there any questions?
Hey, Fabio, how are outputs handled?
That's a very good question. Currently, I think there's a race condition too for some plugins. The PyTorch Elastic plugin explicitly checks for the group rank, which is part of the output that you get from Torch Elastic launch, and it raises an ignore outputs error if the group rank is not 0. So that plugin handles it, but many other plugins don't, and just have a race condition there too. So the PyTorch non-elastic one, the vanilla PyTorch distributed plugin also had a race condition for the outputs. That is a good point. It's not addressed in this.
But as part of, maybe not this RFC, but like a natural question is like, do you also need multiple output files, or is there always going to be some?
My gut feeling is that I think the plugin should figure out which pod communicates the output, and should raise and ignore outputs for all the other worker pods. Because that would really mess with the function signature. Like one instance of the task returns an integer. So we have 10 pods now. Do we get a list of integers now? Like that creates problems, right?
But why is error handling not done the same way? Like why can't one worker or like the parent worker be responsible for communicating all errors?
That's a good question. When, let's say, the task finishes successfully, that means that to the end, the worker pods can communicate with each other and can also, we know that the rank 0, for example, will still be there, right? When such a job fails, one worker is gone and you can't communicate. Like, for example, for PyTorch distributed, you can't communicate anymore, potentially, if you don't have the minimum number of workers. So I feel it would be quite brittle if we rely on, in the case of PyTorch, on communicating via NCCL to figure out which was the root cause error, because you might not even be able to do that anymore.
Okay, so they're able to, workers will be able to emit error logs, but they may fail to communicate back to the master or parent or whatever.
Yeah, you could say it like this. Like if, for example, I can speak in detail about PyTorch. I can't speak in that much detail from the MPI, but for PyTorch, imagine we have a distributed training job. Then these workers, they are in lockstep, and some of the workers, everyone gets a badge that will forward pass, and that will all reduce to synchronize the gradients. And all of the workers are waiting at a synchronization barrier, and one doesn't show up because it crashed. The others, they're deadlocked in that moment. They can't get out of that. They can't do anything anymore. And even if if one were to detect that and raise an exception, then it's not guaranteed that you can even communicate anymore over NCCL. If, for example, the rank 0 is gone, like it's very brittle to rely on the distributed communication package to communicate the error when the distributed worker group's already not communicating anymore.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
We had that idea, like it was discussed, but we feel it's very brittle to do it this way because sometimes it might work, sometimes it might not work. For Torch Elastic, there might be a way to do that because you can define like the minimal number of workers that still need to be there in order to establish like a process group. But for non-elastic PyTorch, that's a fixed number. As soon as one is missing, you can't really establish communication anymore. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry, I have not read this RFC.
No worries.
You should be. But I have one question that I'm not sure we discussed, Fabio. What do you think of the idea of instead of picking the first error sorted by time, we collated all errors before bubbling that up to the rest of the whole Flyte.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Like we could, for example, have logic like if any of the errors is recoverable, then treat the entire thing as recoverable. In theory, there could be the rule like all need to be recoverable, right? I feel like for, again, PyTorch, with that I use extensively, it's the earliest error that you want. But we talked about this multi-file error output reader having multiple strategies of how to aggregate the error, right? And I feel like the PyTorch plugin would want the earliest error, but I see that in theory, other plugins might want a different strategy. And I feel we should build it in a way that not every time we need a new strategy, we need to re-implement the logic to read multiple output files, but it's a config of how this thing should aggregate the error. And for the PyTorch plugin, we need earliest, but for others, we might want other strategies.
Yeah, I agree with that. So in the case of PyTorch, within a single pod, PyTorch already has, like PyTorch Elastic already has a mechanism to pick the earliest error and report just that if there are multiple errors as part of the different ranks that run within the same pod. And then at the Flyte level, we also want a similar mechanism where across the pods, we want the earliest error to be propagated. But since we have all the error files, we can have other policies for other plugins potentially to do different things like aggregating all the errors and yeah, other strategies.
Cool. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Any other question? No.
Then our
you, Fab.
question would just be, who can we talk to about the plugin manager and the way that it reads output files currently, just to figure out where to inject where can the plugin config tell the plugin manager, hey, I need a different output manager. Is it the plugin context or is it the plugin properties? Just where to put it. I think both would work. It's just a question of what is nicest. Yeah, so if somebody knows this part well, would be great if you could ping us.
Paul, do you and I want to, maybe we can take a look together and we'll respond on here.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Fabio. This is great. All right. Not new anymore. Jason IDL, well, unfortunately, due to time zone differences, Handrew, aka future outlier, cannot be here. It's very late for him, but I've seen a lot of activity here. Just wondering if there's any open question, any further comment about this proposal.
I think there's only one really outstanding issue that we will nail down in this RFC, which is what is the backwards compatibility story in this? The union team had a discussion earlier today. I think we have a good path forward, but I don't think the RFC was updated yet, and that was spawned by a question that you asked, Fabio, like the whole are we gonna require the annotated JSON to support backwards compatibility or not? We feel that is too much. We don't want to go that route, and I think we have a path forward to be backwards compatible while supporting this new type that we're adding.
Could you say, I'm curious how you want to do it. Could you say a few sentences about it, please?
Yeah, it's just we're gonna do the heavy lifting in the compiler to make sure that the old struct and the new type match whenever possible, by adding some metadata to the literal and doing making some assumptions there whenever possible, obviously.
So does it involve basically saying in the metadata of the literal kind of a version of a type transformer that we need and then keeping the other ones around, or how can I imagine it?
No. It's more about, it'll be a very light touch backwards compatibility, actually. We'll try to do the backwards transformation, right? Like from struct to JSON, not the other way around. So old tasks like cache tasks and old tasks that were registered using previous versions of FlyteKit that don't have support for this new type will work, but you won't be able to get new versions of tasks that use the new type to work with previous tasks, if that makes sense. We can discuss more in the RFC. It's just that we feel that there is a way to have a good notion of backwards compatibility for, you know, just this case of like old tasks.
Okay.
But yeah, pretty pumped about this. That especially because, you know, we're also thinking about support for in the UI and like the Flyte CTL and all that. So people will be happy that we'll be able to encode integers now in dictionaries.
Absolutely. Thank you all. All right. And
Can I,
finally,
before we move to the next one, ask one more question? There was this discussion about the union type transformer, and Future Outlier wrote that you discuss it and proposed to include the path of basically the Python import path, include that in the metadata somewhere. That does not work with inheritance, right? Like I'm fine with that. We just need to catch it. But
Yeah, no, we are aware. But I think this is separate from this RFC. It's more like how we're going to encode data classes in general. I do think that this is a problem, and I don't know how to solve this with inheritance yet. But it's separate from the RFC.
It is. It is.
You agree?
Yeah.
Cool.
awesome. Thank you. And also this small RFC to kind of continue and hopefully agree to continue the conversation and hopefully get to a decision on how to handle community contributed plugins, because right now what happens is that they will get merged in the Flyte repo. This is what I call the in-tree approach. So it means that any community contributed plugin automatically becomes a maintenance task, and that probably could create problems in the future. So the idea is to go with an implementation with some steps. And I think the only missing piece here is what Fabio brought back. We already discussed in the past doing this, like marking them as community maintained using the structure via the import. And I think there's consensus on using this, so I will add it to the proposal. Right. So any other comment, drop it in the RFC unless you have something else to say right now. Oh, yeah.
I
Very
have
simple.
like changing the name of the module. I feel it's too extreme. But we can
Right,
have a
okay.
discussion in the RFC, you know?
Okay. Yeah, please do. Awesome. Thank you. Great. Seems like nothing else in terms of RFCs. And yeah, the reason I'm rushing everything here is to give Andy enough time. Andy, thank you.
I don't want to take over the meeting, but like, you know, like use all the time you guys need. I'm just
Even
coming
if you
in
do
first
it,
time.
man, you already earned the right because you've been a hero so far, trying to do many things to kind of improve the developer experience for the Flyte kit Java SDK. So yeah, again, thank you so much for your effort so far. And yeah, we're all ears. Do you want
Okay,
to
so
share?
yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe get into it a little bit about who I am and our company and a little bit of the use cases. Introducing myself as a senior principal over at Citrine Informatics, and we have a platform that basically at a really high level is a predictive technology that allows materials scientists and chemical engineers to create new materials and new chemicals. And it's basically, the layman's way to discuss, to really explain it is, if you want to bake a cake and you want the cake to have certain properties, right? Moisture, color, consistency, sweetness, these kinds of things that you can measure, we will create recipes that include both ingredients and process, right? Baking and mixing and these kinds of things. And we basically spit out predictions that says, if you want a cake that looks this way, feels this way, tastes this way, here's a bunch of recipes that you can try, right? And they basically go through a sequential iteration there. They do the recipe, they feed the data back into the system, they run another predictions thing, and eventually, you come up with this. It's basically a simulation of a lab, right? But we generate, thousands of candidates, give them the top 20, top 30, top 100, top 500, depending what they're looking for. So that's at a high level, that's what we do. So we provide that in a kind of a single tenant environment. Each enterprise customer, and you can imagine the customers, right? What kind of customers do this? The real use cases are around glass and a lot of sustainability. Like that's a huge footprint right now for us, right? Because you want to create new materials and you don't want plastics in these materials, these kinds of things, right? But you want the same properties or even better properties or even the economics associated with creating these things. So our platform, again, back to the kind of the technology side, all of our services are built on the JVM right now, primarily in Scala. We have some Python modeling kind of in the picture, integrated into that, but generally we're running on the JVM, and we deploy 10 or around 10 services per tenant. And one of our challenges right now, we use AWS Batch for some processing, so for some of our backend processing offline, what I'll call offline versus online, or like on API servers. But we have kind of this mixed kind of bag through the evolution of the technology that says we need to offload some intensive processing off of the API servers, right? So we do everything from just transforming data to ingesting data to featurization to training models to actually running predictions, right? Anything that wouldn't run synchronously in a request reply kind of life cycle on an API server, we need to offload, right? So we have done that. We've even have an asynchronous API where it still runs on the API server, but we treat it like it's just a future that we store, and then they can query it, and kind of built our own that runs on API, but that clearly doesn't scale. So I've been tasked with going out there and saying, okay, let's solve that problem for all of our services and create a keyword multi-tenant, job/workflow offloading system, right? I've done a bunch of research. I went through lots of different, not deep dives, because it's really expensive to do deep dives, but at the end of the day, looking at Dagster, Argo, Airflow, really popular Airflow in the space, right? Just raw Kate's jobs. There's this thing called Job Runner, there's Kubeflow, like all of these things, and ran into Flyte, and a few things kind of grabbed us, right, with Flyte. We have Python use cases in the future, right? We have some kind of Python ecosystem AI technology now that we'd like to simplify and kind of expose to our internal environment that allows us to write native workflows in Python, but we already have native workflows on the JVM. So as you read the documentation, JVM support, Python support, so check. And so here we are, right? And there's a lot more, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to get into the value proposition. Obviously, everybody here knows that because they've adopted it and are contributing back, and it's wonderful. So through our journey, our journey has kind of taken us through kind of a bit of a spike now, right? And that spike has kind of started to identify kind of, I would consider, pretty significant, maybe not the word gaps, maybe learnings as we go through, you know, what we'll call the Java ecosystem. I even hesitate to use the word Flyte Java because that implies kind of a user space thing, right? But Flyte Java, you know, if you go in there, they talk about JFlight and how to register a workflow, which is kind of the only real footprint, at least that I can see within that system, right? So it allows us to, in the user space, define workflows. And if some of you have seen the videos, I've been kind of, you know, going along and trying to do these examples, define workflows. And I ran into, I mean, we just talked about the IDL, JSON IDL, the whole int to double to int. That's a problem in JFlight. Obviously, it just blows up at runtime, right? I've defined some record types case classes in my workflow, define them, everything compiles just fine, looks great, boom, it blows up, right? So, and there's other issues like, you know, it supports only a specific collection type, and it's limited, right? So I don't know where else those kind of hidden kind of, oh, we don't support that lie. So, you know, ran into some of those things and just trying to understand kind of what is the difference, right? And as I go through Flyte Java, I see the protos haven't been updated in like 2 years, right? I see a whole bunch of stuff on Maven, but when you read the docs, it's like, just use, you know, the Java, just import the Java thing and you're good to go. You know, registration is the only thing that is really exposed in the Flyte from like a Flyte admin capability. You know, we don't see much of a roadmap there in that repo, but maybe that could be just a process thing. It might just be part of like Flyte, or there may not be a roadmap for Java. And it's kind of this thing that's just kind of focused at the, you know, at the use cases that Spotify needs, because I understand that Spotify is kind of the Java user, although we know that there's some folks out there who are using it. And when I spoke to one of the community members, they adopt it like binding directly to the protobus, right? So that's what I did, right? I kind of built a bit of a prototype that said, okay, I don't have any Flyte admin stuff here. So I'm going to generate like a whole API using the protobus. That was pretty trivial. But then I've got kind of an impedance mismatch, right? Because some of the data types, I have to kind of build this link from the things that I need here so that I can operate it here. So like some of the use cases are kind of trivial, right? Like if I think about an API request coming in to like kick off a job, right? The parameters are going to come in from the user, right? They're going to have new data. Let's say the workflow is going to be retrain this model with this new data. It might have to go through workflow featurization and training, right? So I need to package up that data that they give me, and I need to kick off a workflow with that. But then I'm going to give them that ID back, that correlation ID that says this job is running, so they can pull it. They can see, you know, I have an API that says, give me all the running jobs and some context around it. So I need kind of Flyte admin capability to do all of that stuff, none of which is really available in any of the SDK ecosystem there. So there's kind of a big gap between what I'll call kind of the controller space, right? Like, or the admin space, and just a user space of defining workflows and running them, right? There's this kind of at least knowledge gap. Maybe there's some things I'm completely missing, but obviously when we reach out to the community, it's pretty limited, right? Like I get some help, like from I think the couple of people I'm guessing that have some insight into that, and it being, you know, a secondary class citizen and maybe even tertiary, like it feels like it's not a topic of conversation. So my goal today is kind of to understand, like, if that's it, that's it, right? And we have to kind of take that into our decision-making process. I'd hate to abandon it from our perspective, but we have to look at our risk tolerance as a company, right? And how much can we contribute versus how much can we gain, right? Like there's just natural economics of adopting open source technology. So without getting into some of the progress, like, you know, I ran into issues with the whole struct binary thing. I'm able to actually execute Java workflows now using a binary type because I've built, you know, some logic that allows me to kind of transfer the binary type from the SDK to the binary type of my IDL stuff, right? That I've got to actually kick off the workflow. So I'm able to do all of that. So technically I can go forward, right, to the next step, but you kind of step back and you say, well, that's pretty heavyweight, right? Like if I'm investing in the SDK and the protos haven't been updated in 2 years, like, you know, what can I look forward to there? How much do I need to contribute? Not saying we're not willing to, right? I think we're a company that is willing to do that. And even personally, I'd be willing to do that. But I don't know that I want to take ownership. Like if that's where we're at, I just need to understand that, that's what I mean by baseline here in this bullet point. Like, what is the baseline, right? Like, is there a place that we can get to where someone like myself and Citrine can reliably contribute to the SDK on the JVM, right? I don't think we're there, right? Because I think even saying I'm starting off with protos that are 2 years old suggests to me that we're not at some sort of a baseline that we can start doing that. Anyway, that's a long-winded update for everybody in terms of where we're at in adoption and kind of the challenges we're getting through. Yeah, so that's kind of it. And if there's any specific questions people can ask, but I think I've kind of given you our sense of kind of what we're trying to accomplish. And maybe you know what, a simple question is what we're trying to accomplish doable, right? Like, does that feel like something that we should be taking on using Flyte, or should we like step back and say maybe not right now?
That is a pretty heavy question, Andy.
Yeah, I know it's heavy. Yeah,
we want you to use Flyte, but
for sure.
Spotify and like Raphael is in the call. Like here, he can correct me in all the parts that I'm wrong. But FlyteKit Java and all like the ecosystem around it like has been owned pretty much by Spotify from day one.
Yeah.
So we don't have a whole lot of insight here. So let's see what
like it is. Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, maybe I'll wait for Rafa to respond or others.
Well, it's a lot to digest, and I feel like it is true that we've maybe been a bit lacking with the FlyteKit Java side. Unfortunately, I guess priorities and so on and time.
100%.
We basically, the way we use FlyteKit Java, it's really for the orchestration side, right? So we have the tasks and we do the DAGs and they trigger a dataflow job, and that is where the heavy processing happens. Basically an Apache Beam job. And that is kind of the start of FlyteKit Java and how it was designed. So yeah, priorities change and so on. Time to work on FlyteKit Java has been a bit lacking, and I've been trying to push a bit more on that, and hopefully this will make me a bit more arguments for us to work on that. I can kind of also explain to you, not sure if this is the right place, happy to like have a one-on-one with you to go through exactly how we trigger things, how we don't use FlyteKit Java, or well, we use JFlyte for registration, but then we just use the Pro Tools to generate these RFCs. Clients try to just talk with Flyte admin. And that's how we trigger, check executions, miss executions, and so on.
But we don't publish that, do we, Rob? Like that stuff that you're talking about in terms of generating those RPC stubs, for lack of better words, that's not something that's like published as part of the API.
It's part of the Pro Tools, right? So you just use the Protos to generate those.
Okay,
It's not
I
part
see.
of
So,
Flyte Java, but
right,
it's just,
right.
yeah, it's just a matter of using the Protos to generate the code, right? And then
Okay.
implementing the client. Yeah.
But maybe
It
there's,
is,
maybe
yes,
we
go
can take the same approach, right? Like, because I'm using completely different technology to generate stubs, then maybe that's an impedance mismatch we can kind of deal with right away. Then I don't have to write a bunch of code around the literal map stuff, right? Like all of those kind of custom type or those types in there that we're using. And then trying to understand also, one of the things I don't quite get is how, I think you let me know, or somebody let me know, that, for example, we deploy all the jars to a task to we have a general container image, and then we deploy all the jars at runtime, like, quote unquote, all the time, right? I think for us, it's not tenable. But then I think, well, maybe we don't have to do that. Maybe we can have our own custom container. And as long as we make our jars really tiny and we only expose, right, only expose the necessary jars, maybe that would work, right? Something like that. Like we would have to think about, a strategy there.
I can,
and I still don't understand why, like how does the
Uh,
Python work versus Java, and why is that a separate kind of a architectural? It feels like that shouldn't be a client side, but anyway, I'm talking over you, so go ahead.
I can explain exactly why. So we came from, before we used Flyte, we used Luigi. I'm not sure if you've heard, but it's something we also built in-house and ended up being open source. And it's just a lab, builds a Docker image and runs the Docker image in a Kubernetes pod, everything contained inside. We, as my team, as platform owners, always struggled with upgrades, with security, because everyone is building their own Docker image. Everyone's do their own magic within the Docker file, and you have no clue how many problems we have to deal with every day, because someone did some black magic 5 years ago and they left, and now this has been running for 5 years, and now it's broken and we have no clue. So the idea is, or the idea with the implementation we've done, is that we don't expose the Docker file. The Docker image is literally Flyte Java. And this allows us to not only to be able to override the Flyte Java image if necessary for the user without touching the user code. Imagine security issues and so on that we need to push like an upgrade to the fleet. And also, it's just, another thing that we saw, or this was before I joined the team, but another big thing that we saw is that folks complain a lot on our side that Docker files the Docker images are heavy, uploading, blah, blah, blah. And we've kind of built its own caching system, right? So you only upload the jars once. If they've been uploaded, as kind of, if you're a developer and you're working on it and you're running it, it just uploads once. We have this kind of checksum, so we don't upload more. But then the reverse is exactly what you said. And what we've seen with growth of Flyte is that in our case, we have a lot of jars, and it can get a bit heavy. Especially, for example, for the map task, we haven't implemented. I was actually starting to work on implementing the map task in Flyte Java like a while ago, and once I looked, like, no, this is not going to pan out. So it's also another thing that I've been bringing to the team, that yes, for the developer experience, it's great, but for the runtime, it's not. We always have the excuse of, our jobs, our data jobs are very long running, like they take hours to run. So, another 10, 20, 30 seconds overhead is not too much. to download all the jars, but it has other costs and implications which I don't really like. So yes, that's another point that I kind of tend to agree with you, and I will. We definitely need to do something about it, or improve it, simplify it somehow. But yeah, it's as it is today. It is what it is. This is kind of the reasons.
Yeah,
we've.
I mean,
we've
there,
done
and
this
that's
approach.
fine, right? Like, there's always a like. Let's not pretend that that's not the only piece of software that has, you know, technical debt or like, it's the evolution of software. Like, welcome to software engineering, right? Like, but I would like to maybe think about, okay, well, how do we get from here to there, right? So in order to get to there, I think we need to define what there is, right? Like, what is this? Like, can we go through a light road mapping exercise? Could we go through something like, and again, I'm not saying let's go through road mapping and please, Raphael, can you please just do it all by yourself? Like, no, I don't think that's the right answer. But I also don't think even I saw somebody join today, you know, looking at the JVM, right? It's like, if we make it like approachable from a contribution perspective and have a good understanding of the gaps between where we are today, come up with a process that allows us to keep up to date-ish in a way, right? And kind of some contribution, you know, process, I'll say, it might, like, the delta might not be that bad, right? There may not be that much to do in a sense. Like, I feel like today I could probably implement my first use cases to where I'm at today, like just using a binary type. Like, I don't love it because when I go into the console,
Yeah,
I see binary and I don't see anything, right? Like, sure, it worked, but I can't really make sense of the data, even though it's moving across. I'm taking care of for the serialization stuff on the client side. You know, but I can do it, right? I'd love to know, you know, this JSON IDL discussion, like, I'd want that adopted on the Java side, like, almost immediately, right? Like, and in order to do that, I think we got to get to the baseline first and kind of adopt all the other things that, maybe not all the other things. So I don't think it has to necessarily be one for one, but I wonder if, given that most of them are platform features, right? Like, I wonder if it's just easier to stay up to date, and it should maybe be, as much as in a lot of cases, just keeping the protos in sync, right? And a lot of that capability just might, and we might just say that's the native API. Like, I don't know. We can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so maybe a separate meeting is warranted to kind of focus on the Java SDK and come up with a bit of a plan there. And the first thing might be, hey, let's just get some documentation out on what, and I'd be happy to contribute, of course, there, on what the gaps are, what the approach is, you know, what some of the use cases we can do, you know, just kind of get that baseline going. And as I discover new things, I don't think we've found anything that would prevent us from adopting it. You know, I think people would be scared that it's an abandoned project, but I hate using that word because I don't think it's abandoned. I just think the use cases that Spotify needs are kind of already working, so they're not really touching it much, right? So you can argue that that's abandoned, but you can also argue that it isn't, right? So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, it is not abandoned, right? So we do maintain it, we do the security upgrades, but yeah, feature wise, you know, it's slow. Remember, just like, I don't know, 3-4 weeks ago, I implemented the max parallelism on the launch plan level that wasn't implemented. Someone else is also actually there's a PR that we're gonna review tomorrow, implementing like optional types in the Scala side. So it's slow, but if the PRs are there, like in terms of review, we'll review and comment and merge, of course. And
I have one tactical question, and maybe we can take it offline, not
Sure.
to pull everybody into this conversation. One tactical question. There's a documentation page out there somewhere on the Python side that says, here's how you implement a custom type. Is that available on the JVM? Like, can I like create a custom type? Like, here's an example. It's protos all the time, right? So what if we generated types by proto first? Like, is that a completely separate platform feature? I mean, it kind of feels like it, right? Like, contribute your own protos. Those are the native things that you're passing around, right? And then the platform itself could actually like pull that stuff in, right? Like that would be, I don't know if that's low-hanging fruit, if that's, because everything today needs to get into that literal map, right? Every single data type has to get to that somehow, because those are the only things that are supported. At least that's what I understand. So I'm just trying to understand if there's a way for me to use, like, my data types more natively inside of Flyte today, or how people do that. Like, how do they do that?
In our case, I don't think there is anyone doing it. We just do, whatever is available.
Okay.
And
are your use cases mostly like primitives? You're just using primitives in most cases?
Some structs here and there. Mainly
Okay.
primitives, yes.
Okay.
Because because we just use another orchestration layer, right? Our principle or our main use case is basically like check for dependencies, the data is there, trigger the job, generate, whatever we need after the job is done. And the actual, data processing is within the Apache Beam. So we have this thing that we also built, which is called Shio, if you want to take a look at.
It's called Shear?
Shio, which is a Scala layer on top of Apache Beam.
Can you, how do you spell that?
SCIO.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I know that.
So that is where we do pretty much all the crazy processing. And
yeah, so you use Beam most of, okay. So it's really horizontal for you guys, right? Like, and you're using Beam, like the Beam model, for most of your, okay. Yeah.
The ML folks use Flyte Java. I think Spotify that contributed to the Cube4 stuff, if I'm not wrong. Please correct me. But yeah, they are my kind of like, they use Python because they love their Python, and then Flyte.
Yeah, we want to enable some data scientists too, right? Because right now, our backend engineering is heavy, JVM, and a lot of our knowledge in the, I'll say, in the AI ML space is naturally going to be in the Python space, right? That's just what it is. So that's kind of our future evolution to get there. So that's another real check mark for us around Flyte itself. And lastly, I guess one last thing that I didn't put down is someone can just DM me or throw somewhere about, I have some questions that I was kind of able to answer well, but maybe somebody has some documentation on, people are saying, well, why not just use Kubernetes jobs natively? And I'm like, well, that's the whole reason Flyte exists, right? Like because using it natively is, I got to do all these other things, right? Like all the features on top of Kate is what Flyte has given me. So when I think about the answer to that question, there's a lot there, right? Like in terms of like versioning and just a whole bunch of things I won't get into, right? But if someone can point me to something that already exists, that'd be great. It'll just help me with my business case on this side.
Andy, great to meet you. I'm John. I'm on the product side at Union. Thanks for bringing this up and chatting it. I'm trying to think of like even like super basic things we can do to like get people together. So like I don't know, anything we can do on the Flyte side, like we could make a channel in the community that's like Flyte JVM users and make an announcement that says, hey, if you're interested in doing this, like come and join this group. Like try to get people together. Like we're a tiny company, and probably 99.8% of people use Python SDK, and that's why the investment's going there at the moment. It's not it's definitely not abandoned. Spotify's an incredibly important company to us, and we want to oh yeah, David has it. So maybe we could just do kind of a call to action, or we could peel
You know,
off
it's
things
interesting, just to
again.
respond to your one point there, 98% of the people, like, you don't know what the cause and effect there is, right? Like, I
For sure.
do believe that the greater portion would be the Python, but I don't know that it's 98 to 2 if they're walking into the door and you've got a really good JVM story, right? I
100%.
actually don't know of a better toolkit today on the JVM that solves some of these problems, which is kind of like, that's pretty key, right? Because if there was something else that was JVM only that was like really, really good, I would probably already be using it and I would have never landed here. The point is, like, I think there's a market, is my point.
Yeah, very, very fair. And I think it's would be great to kind of continue the conversation, understand a bit more about your use case and the background and how, if that differs from, the kind of traditional Python use cases, and see if we can enable you there and make it clearer to potential users that Flyte also does support Java.
For sure.
Yeah, the other tactic that I wanted to ask about, I don't know, Andy, how do you want to proceed? Do you think that turning some of these learnings gaps that you have identified as issues that we can probably feed into a board or a GitHub project where we can track everything will be useful? Or you think
To me, that's
there are-
what, like, I would like to have a separate meeting, identify some of the things that I've talked about here and actually write them down. Create, some tickets are just like write some docs, right? And like I can do some of that and take some of those. Some other tickets might be to understand write some docs around understanding how, like, we just talked about how Spotify actually uses the Flyte admin API directly, right? Maybe some documentation around that, right? Maybe almost like a cookbook, like use case driven. But the first thing we do is just identify those things. And I think it can be informed by the challenges that we've had in the last month trying to adopt this, right?
Great. And the other thing is that Andy noticed that the FlyteKit Java repo doesn't have issues enabled. I reached out to Andres Gomez from Spotify, and he said, well, we can turn it on, no problem. But just wondering if we want to kind of track issues and all this on the FlyteKit Java repo, or still handle
Or
this
where Flyte is. Yeah. I mean, if people need visibility, I don't know really what the best place for it would be, but like, I think it probably needs at least some segregation, whether it be tags. If you use it in the main repo, we need a tag for it to kind of separate that stuff.
I'm fine with whatever. I guess this was set up again before I joined, and this is it's fine for us. I guess it would make more sense to have it in one place as it is, right? Because before the mono repo, we only had one place to make sure that everything was there. But I defer to Flyte folks. What's best for the Spotify side, we're fine.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, any other comments, questions? I think enough comments and questions. Again, thanks so much, Joe and Andy, for joining, for everything you've done so far. Hopefully we can
I appreciate everybody
more.
listening, and that's I think it's wonderful. I think the community getting together all the time. I mean, there's a community contributors meeting, there's just a community meeting, like I mean, it's looks like a very healthy community and well run. I just need I just want to see if we can slot in on the JVM, just kind of take all the idioms and all the kind of ways you guys are solving the Python side and kind of bring that to the JVM side and maybe create some sense of urgency around it in a positive way.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Well, thank you. We're running short on time, so if nothing else, I don't see anything else in the agenda. So thank you all for joining. The next contributor thing will take place in 2 weeks. It will be at 7 a.m. Pacific. That's, I think, 4 hours earlier than this one. And this is to accommodate other time zones. And yeah, hope to see you there. Some of you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.